Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the story about Naruto. What if Naruto was in ANBU Black Ops, Part 4. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please do support for more awesome content and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And also support the creator of this fanfic. I have created many playlists, check it out in the channel. So let's start the video. Naruto grimaced in his sleep, with his dreams only at the edge of his mind, but bothering him nonetheless. If he were to wake, he'd find that his eyes were burning, as they had before. The boy began to toss and turn in his bed, grunting, as if in pain. He was in danger of waking up his team with the noise when his movements suddenly stopped. Naruto opened his eyes and looked around him. Instantly he was alert upon realizing he was in an unfamiliar place. He looked around the immediate vicinity, which consisted of a dark corridor. Though he was uncertain as to how he had woken standing on his feet, he was grateful due to the half-inch of suspicious-looking liquid on the ground. Though the ceiling was not high, it was surprisingly difficult to make out in the gloom. The faint light that existed seemed to come from the pipes running along the walls for as far as he could see. The pipes seemed to be as grimy and dark as everything else, yet the light seemed to come from their direction. Naruto approached a pipe and put his ear near to it, only to be met with silence. The blonde boy began to stretch out his senses, including his hearing, sight, and even his sense of smell. Things began to look clearer with his heightened sense, but nothing more was revealed aside from more hallway. Surprisingly, there was almost no smell even with his sense of smell at its peak. His hearing, however, picked up something. Naruto heard deep and long breaths that suggested whatever was taking them was large. There was also an occasional scratching noise that he could make out, and he had to wonder what was further along the corridor. Naruto made his way cautiously down the length of the dark corridor, but it felt like he wasn't progressing, as it looked all the same. There were side corridors at regular intervals leading from the larger corridor, but the sounds were not coming from any of them. After about 5 minutes he saw the corridor turn, leaving him no other option than to go right when he got to that point. With an equal sense of foreboding and determination, Naruto made slow splashing steps towards the bend. Turning the corner, Naruto unexpectedly found himself in a huge room that only increased his worry. Despite more light and his enhanced eyesight, the blonde boy could not make out the distant ceiling. At the other end of the room there was a large set of bars, which looked decidedly ominous. Each one was square and as wide as his body. The gap between them was just a little wider than their width. They rose from the floor up into the dark heights of the ceiling, the full length hidden from his eyes. On the middle two bars there was a small piece of paper on which was written the kanji for seal. Naruto, not scared but aware something unusual was going on, spun around to check on his escape route. He turned only to find that behind him was nothingness, not even a wall, and he tried to look into the distance. The blonde boy couldn't even make out an edge to the room. It looked as if he was trapped here for the time being. Scratch. Scratch. Naruto's head spun around once more to the bars, noticing, as he did, that an actual source of light was visible, and he moved closer. As the boy moved closer, the light didn't seem any nearer, even as he was right in front of the bars. Snap! A huge set of saliva-drenched teeth closed with a resounding noise just the other side of the bars, and in reflex Naruto jumped back away from the bars. He watched as the giant teeth seemed to grow a muzzle, and then a huge set of red glowing eyes, narrowed and angry looking. The rest of a house-sized head appeared in his field of vision before a body to match became visible also. An animal that looked poised to pounce upon him stood before him, 9 tails swaying angrily behind it. Each appendage was the size of the Hokage Tower, and the fluffy fur on them did little to detract from their menacing presence. Naruto's face showed nothing. Kyuubi. The blonde realized where he was. The large fox watched as the blonde boy flared his chakra and tore towards the bars. The boy didn't slow down as he passed through them. Naruto charged chakra into his fist and plowed it straight into the side of the 9-tailed demon's face, managing to cause the muzzle to shift a few inches. A huge tail slammed into the blonde with rib-shattering force, pinning him against one of the bars. The monster's eyes were evil-looking and hateful as they narrowed slightly. "You have got a pair on you." Naruto was surprised that the demon's body language and expression gave off an evil aura, yet its voice seemed oddly neutral, though it seemed to ripple with intensity. Naruto felt the weight crushing his chest, but his arms had been left free, and the gasping blonde charged chakra to both of his hands. Forming chakra blades, he sliced at the fox's tail, cutting through swathes of glowing red fur and eventually into flesh. He didn't take time to think how he and the fox had seemingly corporeal bodies in here or how he could use chakra. The blue-eyed genin used chakra to stick to the bar as the tail was pulled back reflexively, but as he watched, the tail healed in a mere second. Another tail rushed forwards just as the blonde finally released a chakra grip he had been holding, making him slide just beneath it before he hit the ground running. Naruto ran towards the main body of the Kyuubi, and jaws snapped at him as he moved, but the boy dodged to the left and rolled. Quickly jumping back up, he continued to run with obvious purpose. Reaching the creature's underbelly, the blonde forced chakra into and out of his feet and shot high into the air, landing on the leg of the creature. He ran up the limb and then jumped off again, doing half a somersault backwards. He slashed at the animal's stomach mid-flight, but even though the blades sliced, it was only a minor injury to the beast. The creature's stomach was less sensitive than the tail's apparently. The demon's container didn't even feel the paw that hit him, slamming him across the cage and into the floor. The wind left Naruto's lungs as he heard his bones crack and he began to feel dizzy. It was then that it occurred to him in a detached manner that he did not know how he had a body in his own mind or how it was able to take damage. Kyuubi's head moved across the distance in moments, its large head just above the blonde and its razor-sharp teeth inches from Naruto's head. In a single bite, the creature could consume him whole. As he lay in a prone position, saliva dripped from one of the long canines and dripped onto his chest. Naruto looked into the demon's eyes and found that there was only malevolence therein. The colossal mouth was formed into a snarl and it looked certain he was going to die. Whack! Kyuubi did nothing for a moment, surprised that the blonde had punched it square in the nose. Naruto watched the massive jaws as they flashed open and shot downward. The last thing he saw was the endless darkness that the mouth led to. Naruto woke up in cold sweat and looked around, noticing in the moonlight that he hadn't woken anyone up. He knew that it had been more than a simple dream, the details too clear and memorable. He'd met the infamous Kyuubi, and predictably they had not got along. Naruto took deep relaxing breaths as he assured himself that everything was fine, just as he had done so many times before. He created a gentle breeze around his body, evaporating the sweat and soothing his mind. Soon he fell asleep and the breeze died down. There was no sign that he'd woken up at all. Naruto sat cross-legged on the ground in the forest that evening, not meditating, but deep thought. After a pleasantly non-eventful first day guarding Tazuna on the bridge, the team had decided to get straight to training, taking some snacks with them for their evening meal. Naruto had left his teammates with his sensei some distance away in the woods, far enough to hide most of the loud noises he would most likely be making. Naruto's mind was focused on one thing, a technique that he hadn't seen in its complete form. Kakashi, in one of his more inquisitive moments, had shown him the incomplete version to see what the boy would make of it. The silver-haired Jounin knew the principles behind it and had explained what he knew about it in detail. Naruto had a knack for creating and mastering jutsu, so he had hoped the blonde would be able to combine both these traits to recreate one technique in particular. Progress had been slow without a real demonstration to work from, even with all the clones that the boy could use to speed up his training. In the end, it had been put aside in favor of training in other areas and with different techniques, but it had always been Naruto's intention to master it one day. Now the fox boy decided that day would be sooner rather than later. Naruto stood up. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a puff of smoke, there were 100 Narutos and they got to work with a determined air. Kurenai stood in front of Hinata and Ino, back to full health thanks to a full night's sleep and a restful day. What I'm going to show you both now is the key to mastering almost any jutsu you care to name: tree climbing. Excuse me? Ino wasn't sure she had heard right. Over the day she had made an effort to put her feelings about her father to the back of her mind. She needed to focus on their mission and did not intend to let her teammates down. Hinata looked confused but politely remained silent, trusting Kurenai to teach them what they needed to know. She was already beginning to see the older Kunoichi as a mother figure, something she had been lacking for some years. Let me show you. Kurenai formed her hands into the ram seal and pushed chakra into her feet as she approached the tree in front of her, putting one leg on and then the other. The Jounin sensei proceeded to defy gravity and walk vertically up the tree. The Jounin walked down again and saw that her two Kunoichi genin looked impressed. "K Kurenai sensei, we're going to learn that?" Hinata would have paled had her skin not already been so fair. Kurenai nodded. Yes. This exercise will help increase your stamina and your chakra control, the foundations of performing jutsu of any kind. Ino looked at Hinata, who smiled back nervously, and then back at the tree Kurenai had walked up. Come on Hinata, the trees won't climb themselves. Just like that, any anxiousness the two felt evaporated, Hinata encouraged by Ino's example, and Ino strengthened by having to lead Hinata by example. The two began to train, while Kurenai watched with a smile on her face. After several hours of training, Naruto was lying on his back exhausted, looking at the starlit sky. He was already eating one of his bars, and, despite its already pleasant taste, he tried to imagine the taste of ramen instead. Despite his tired and ramen-less state, Naruto smiled. He'd made real progress that evening. He'd learned a lot in the last year, and his chakra control had improved enough to be a real help to him. The trees in the small clearing showed the damage from his much improved, but still imperfect, technique. Naruto felt a little re-energized from his snack and slowly got himself up, heading back to where his teammates were training. During his 15-minute walk, he looked at the sky and realized the hour was later than he thought. It must have fast been approaching midnight. It being so late, he was surprised to find his team still where he had left them. Kurenai was amusingly enough sitting back against a tree, asleep, yet the red-eyed woman was surprisingly graceful even as such. Naruto was under no illusions, however. At the first sign of danger she would be wide awake and set for battle. Hinata was lying on the ground, but she was not asleep. Her winded breaths were just visible in the cool night air. It showed how tired she was that she didn't even notice her teammates' arrival. Ino was still on her feet, though only just, and staggered up to the tree as she made the ram seal. Naruto could tell from where he was standing that there was not enough chakra in her feet to make it up the tree, but Ino was too tired to realize this. The blonde girl put a foot on the tree and tried to lift the other foot, but the first couldn't support even her meager weight, and she slipped. Lucky for Ino, Naruto had the foresight to move towards his teammate and get ready to catch her, which he did. Ino looked up at her teammate's face and gave a vague sort of smile before proceeding to fall asleep. Naruto had to hold in his laughter at the sight. By this point, Hinata had realized that her male teammate was back, and she managed to sit up. She managed a small smile as Naruto approached her and put her other teammate beside her. "You've been training hard, I see." Naruto's voice showed his approval. Hinata was still breathing hard. "Ino, she's a slave driver." The pearl-eyed girl covered her mouth, unable to believe what she said about her teammate. She was just so tired, and she ached. She does seem particularly driven. Naruto had not seen Ino so motivated before. "I have to admit I'm impressed by both of you. You've obviously only just stopped doing the exercise yourself." Hinata had lain on the ground only moments before the time she guessed Naruto had arrived. "I think she's trying to take her mind off of her, leaving the rest unsaid." Naruto frowned under his mask, unsure if there was anything to say to the sleeping girl to ease her mind. In a way, the issue with her father was nothing to do with him. It was the fact that the image she had of her father had been shattered that was the problem. At least from his point of view. "I guess it's good to focus on something else, better than trying to keep it all inside." Hinata nodded, having spoken briefly to Kurenai when Ino had gone to answer the call of nature earlier. The two of them had been forced to agree on the same thing. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto managed to perform the technique quietly enough not to wake the two sleeping females. Hinata had been caught by surprise as she had begun to stare at the clear star-filled sky. "Naruto-kun, what are you doing?" Hinata already had a startling idea. Naruto's eyes showed his mischievous smile. "Helping my teammates after a hard day's training." The three clones proceeded to pick up one of the three women, each with skillful care. Kurenai's eyes flickered open in reflex, but her subconscious was satisfied with her current circumstances and sent her right back to sleep. Hinata was blushing slightly as she was carried and wished she was asleep like her teammate and sensei. It still came as a surprise that Naruto was so warm and kind once you got to know him properly, a far cry from his former apathetic behavior. Naruto and his little group headed back to the Tazuna residence. It promised to be an interesting week. Naruto had already sent some clones to scout the town, hinged so they were not recognized, and he'd found that Gatu had left town for a few days. The blonde would have to wait for him to return, but he had not forgotten his self-appointed task. 4 days later. A lone figure crept around in the shadows in the dank gray alleys, jumping from one dark corner to the next. The only sound was the movement of the air as the individual moved and the heavy rain falling from the gloomy sky. The high wall proved no obstacle, and the figure was up and over in a matter of seconds, no one the wiser. Naruto stood in the shadows of the wall, watching the guards pace back and forth lazily. He ignored the raindrops falling on his head, which made his hair hang down. He could tell some of the guards were inebriated, too confident in themselves as they moved. The men were large and looked powerfully built, but the blonde knew he could overpower any of them without even using chakra. His dark outfit showed its true purpose, in so much that it hid it, and Naruto moved unseen across the courtyard into the large building. Even without his senses heightened, he could hear music, the sounds of a party coming from within the four-story mansion. The fox boy moved to the darkest part of the wall and proceeded to scale it using chakra. He made his way to the first-floor window and looked in. The room contained even more of Gatu's men, lounging around and drinking, talking about what Kami knew. Naruto didn't care and continued up past the party. This time he continued to the top floor and headed towards the largest window in the middle of the wall, having guessed the crime lord was the type to put himself in the biggest room. Soon the blonde ninja was outside the largest room, and sure enough, behind an absurdly large desk sat the man Tazuna had described to him. The man looked particularly smug as he talked to another man who looked particularly unsavory. Naruto restrained himself from just blasting into the room and decided to listen into the conversation. He focused on his ears, and soon the man's words became clear. Going to attack the Konoha group in 5 days' time at the bridge. Even if he wins, he'll be so beat up that he can be disposed of. Spread the word around. I need a large number of men, the usual big muscles, and a tiny brain type. We'll show Zabuza what a foolish little baby demon he is. The green-suited man leaned back in his chair with a smirk while his underling bowed and left the room. Naruto continued to hesitate, wondering what to do with this information, and realized he had two options. The blonde could smash into the room and kill the crime lord in a heartbeat, as he had planned, and he'd have to deal with Zabuza afterward. The man was completely psychotic, so he might attack the Konoha group in anger or just leave. If he waited for Gatu to arrive on the bridge and betray Zabuza first, then the chances of him leaving the Konoha group alone were greater. It wasn't that Naruto was a coward simply avoiding battle, but he had his teammates and even his sensei to think of. Clinging unseen to the wall for 10 minutes, the blonde made his decision. He slowly made his way back down the wall and back into the darkness from whence he came. Gatu had no idea how close he had come to death that night. The Konoha team sat with Tazuna and his family at the meal table. The atmosphere was somber after Naruto had filled them in on what he had heard the night before. By an unspoken agreement, they decided not to rush their meal, but even though Hinata's silence was not unusual, Ino's was almost deafening. The silence was suddenly broken by the person they expected it from the least, Inari. Why are you bothering? You're all going to die. You can't defeat Gatu, so why bother at all? Everyone was too stunned to respond to the boy's outburst, even his mother and grandfather. Naruto understood the boy's sense of defeat since the tsunami had told them about the boy's father figure's fate. Inari, we all want to give up. Sometimes it hurts to keep trying, to keep going. We find ourselves asking ourselves, is it worth it? Why keep trying? But in the end it comes down to this. Naruto looked the boy straight in the eye. Are you willing to bear the pain of trying your hardest? To push yourself beyond your limit? To do what people tell you that you can't? In order to protect those you care for and honor those who have fallen doing the same. Inari's face was blank as he took the words in, but Naruto had not finished. No one can live forever, Inari. All we can do is the best with the time we have. Your father understood that. I wish I could have met him. He was a real hero, and he still can be if you learn from his example and do what's right. Naruto stood up and headed out the room, needing to get out of the house to think. Behind him silence reigned. He knew that at least some of what he had said got through. Naruto sat high in a tree, at first thinking about his family: Kuri, Miya, Anko, Tsuki, Yamato, Sakura, Akiko, Kakashi, Iruka, and now Hinata, Ino, and Kurenai. He would make sure that he survived and that all his teammates would live. He would not lose to Zabuza or his companion because he had too many people to protect to die anytime soon. This thought inspired him, and he began to train, the hardest he had done since Akiko had nearly died. Elsewhere in the forest, Ino and Hinata were training intently, having themselves been inspired by their teammates' words. Hinata practiced her family's fighting style by sparring with her sensei, and Ino tried to learn a genjutsu that Kurenai had shown her. The Yamanaka girl could not bring herself to train in her family jutsu, the very thought nauseating her. Kurenai and her 2 female students were surprised when Naruto didn't make an appearance. They rested for a time before heading in the direction the blonde had gone. The 3 kunoichi walked for a while before they heard heavy panting as they walked into a clearing. Ino looked around at the destruction. There were boulders smashed to pieces, trees literally torn in half, and craters in the ground. The blonde-haired girl's jaw dropped. Hinata saw that Naruto was barely able to stand and moved over to him. Naruto-kun. Naruto was covered in sweat and not a small amount of dirt. Being tired, he hadn't heard them arrive. "Hello, Hinata-chan." Naruto nodded to the raven-haired girl a little shakily. Kurenai found the landscape a little disturbing. "You've been training hard." Naruto's eyes showed determination. "It's not enough, Kurenai-sensei. I won't stop until I have done it." "Done it?" Ino's curiosity was piqued, more so because of the carnage around them. Naruto nodded. "One of the hardest techniques I've ever attempted." This caught everyone's interest, but Hinata was more concerned over Naruto's condition. "And maybe you should finish for the night?" She was surprised he hadn't fallen over yet. Naruto shook his head. "I have to keep going as long as I can. You 3 go home and rest. I'll be back when I'm ready." Ino didn't look pleased. "Naruto, don't you think?" Naruto's voice came out almost desperate. "Please, Ino-chan, I have to get stronger. I just have to." Ino was just about to push the point when Kurenai put her hand on the young girl's shoulder and shook her head. "Just don't stay out all night, Naruto." Naruto nodded and took a deep breath. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A few dozen clones appeared as the women left the clearing. Hinata looked back at Naruto for a moment before turning to her sensei. "Kurenai-sensei?" She wanted to know what the older woman was thinking, and Ino also turned her attention to the jounin. "You want to know why I let Naruto continue to train?" The red-eyed woman saw the 2 girls nod. When he spoke to Inari earlier, it was obvious he was speaking from experience. Naruto is pushing himself past his limits to protect others in this country, but most importantly those he cares about, and I think that includes us. Both girls looked at their sensei in surprise. Despite how distant Naruto appears to most people, I believe he's a very people-oriented person. Now that he doesn't have to keep up his pretense around us, he's allowed himself to think of us as friends. Kurenai saw that both girls understood. Now what you have to remember is that, before he was adopted, Naruto built a family in the minds of those close to him. The girls looked a little less understanding now. Naruto legally has a mother, father, aunt, and cousin. I also think he sees various others in familial roles, but I'm also guessing that Naruto has no siblings or those he considers as such, so it's natural for him to fit that role to 2 girls a similar age to himself who he has become closer to the 2 of you. Ino and Hinata stopped walking, looking thoughtful, but neither of them said anything. "Does that bother you?" Kurenai had thought the girls would be flattered. "No." Both voices came out quiet, but firm. Ino shook her head. "I'm glad, sensei. I don't have any brothers or sisters, and I don't have much faith in my family right now. It would be nice to have someone who I can trust, that I can consider family." "Hinata?" Kurenai turned to her other student. Hinata gave a small but happy smile. "My family doesn't want me to have Kurenai-sensei." She continued when her teacher was about to interrupt. "It's true." Hinata looked at the ground, a tear welling up around each pearl-colored eye, before she wiped them away, but when she looked up she smiled once again. At least I know that somebody wants me and their family." The moment was both tinged with happiness and sadness for the 2 young girls. The group continued their way back to the house. "Hey, you'll catch a cold sleeping in a place like this." A peaceful and feminine voice disturbed the sleeping figure. Naruto groaned before sitting up, his body thankfully fully recovered from all that he had asked of it. He'd been so exhausted the night before that he'd actually collapsed where he'd stood. He then looked at the girl who had spoken to him, a pretty young woman, and something about her struck him as familiar. "Haku?" The girl answered his unspoken question. "You're a ninja?" Naruto nodded vaguely, still in the process of waking up. Something about this girl was bothering him. The girl noticed that the boy had obviously been training hard. "Tell me, do you have someone precious to you?" She sounded almost anxious, though her face remained calm. Naruto was confused by the girl's question, and things were beginning to feel surreal. "Yes." Naruto began to concentrate on his senses, even as he was reminded of those he had been thinking so much about the previous evening. "You're lucky. Protecting those precious to you is how you truly become strong." The girl's voice conveyed a surprising sense of sadness. Naruto's eyes widened as it suddenly hit him. "Is that why you protect Zabuza?" This time it was Haku's turn to be surprised. What do you mean?" Haku surprised herself with her nervousness. She was usually so calm it even worried Zabuza, yet now she felt vulnerable and panicky. "I remember your scent. You're the hunter nin who saved Zabuza." Naruto kept his tone calm. Haku began to back away, but turned around when a voice made her turn back. "If you let this continue, Zabuza will die." Naruto crossed his arms, his expression grave. Haku began to feel angry though it didn't show. "I won't let you hurt Zabuza-sama." Naruto shook his head sadly. "You misunderstand me, Haku-san. I have no desire to hurt him. If you can convince him to leave Tazuna and my team alone, then I'll let him be." Naruto's expression then turned so hard that even Haku found it intimidating. "But if Zabuza tries to hurt my friends, I will not hold back, and if I have to destroy him, I will. It's his choice." Naruto then waited for her to leave, doubting anything would change, but he had to give it a chance. It was the same with the situation with Gato. Haku's face became impassive as she understood the blue-eyed boy. His teammates were precious to him. "Goodbye, Naruto-kun." Naruto nodded. "Goodbye, Haku-san." The girl quickly left, soon invisible through the foliage. Naruto sighed and turned around, heading back to the house. Things had gotten complicated. The girl didn't seem to be a bad person, but she was close to a person who was. He honestly hoped that he wouldn't be forced to hurt her, but he would do what he had to. 3 days later. The workers had been given the day off, but work was going to be the last thing on their minds today. Naruto looked at the bright blue sky, seeing that the shining sun paid no heed to his problems before he looked around at his teammates. They had brought Tazuna with them for his own protection. Tsunami and Inari would be safe with a clone patrolling, just in case. Naruto couldn't allow himself to relax as he made sure to keep alert, ready to detect the presence they were expecting. Ino and Hinata sat on either side of their sensei. The tension was palpable. They had known for 5 days that the attack would come this day, but that did not make it any easier on their nerves. Naruto felt the air shift. "They're here." Even as he spoke, half a dozen Zabuza fell from the sky and encircled the group. They burst into water before they got a chance to move, and the only sign that Naruto had even moved was that he had shifted his body weight from one foot to the other. Zabuza stood a little distance away with his arms crossed, but he didn't look worried. Beside him was the masked figure they had seen before, though Naruto had seen her real face. On the other side of the Demon of the Mist were 2 familiar ninja, the ones who had attacked them near the beginning of their journey. "Nice to see your little holiday hasn't softened you up." He turned to the 2 men beside him, first to the one on the left, then the one on the right. "Gozu, Maizu, I trust you can take care of the 2 girls." The 2 men just glanced at the girls. No one escapes the Demon Brothers twice. Gozu's voice was filled with confidence. Zabuza turned to Haku. "Haku, take care of the woman. She's Jounin, so you will probably have to use that technique." The masked girl nodded. The Demon of the Mist turned to face the blonde boy. "Let's see how you fight against me at full strength, brat." Naruto took a deep breath. "Gato means to betray you. I heard him informing one of his subordinates that he and a band of heavies are going to come later to finish you off after our battle." Zabuza frowned under his bandages before his expression turned cold. "Coward." Naruto knew that the sword-wielding ninja didn't believe him, and his small hope of avoiding a conflict was lost. If they were lucky, they could hold off until Gato came and proved him right. Even then, there was no guarantee what would happen. "Have it your way, Zabuza." Kurenai looked towards her team with concern evident on her face. "Don't I consider it an order?" Naruto would have rolled his eyes had the situation not been so serious. He glanced at his 2 teammates and could smell their fear, but it wasn't overpowering. The 2 Kunoichi of Team 8 looked determined. Kurenai's face looked blank, but as an experienced fighter, she was bound to suppress any emotion. The group had managed to split into 3 almost unnoticeably, each with their own opponents. Zabuza turned his back to Naruto and began walking casually away, while Naruto followed at an equally relaxed pace. Soon they were a good distance down the bridge from the others. "I don't want anyone getting in our way." Naruto didn't give any sign that he had heard and watched as Zabuza began forming seals. The fox boy prepared himself for anything. Kurigakure no Jutsu. Hiding mist technique, the nuke nin quickly disappeared from view, but he didn't bother with his normal speech. There was not much chance that he would be able to intimidate his young opponent. He waited in the mist for an opportune moment. Naruto began to form seals of his own. Futen. Shippuheki no Jutsu. Wind release. Hurricane burst technique. Naruto released a large amount of wind-imbued chakra in one burst, in one direction, and the effect was immediate. Zabuza watched with interest as a small but powerful gale tore through the immediate area, and the mist between them was blown away. After a moment he was forced to close his eyes due to the force of the wind that whipped around him. Realizing the boy was a devious fighter, he jumped aside as the gale died down. He opened his eyes in time to see Naruto swipe his blade at the space where he had just been standing. "I am not going to underestimate you again." Naruto smiled under his mask. "You already have." Zabuza didn't dodge fast enough, and, as the clone in front of him burst, the real Naruto sliced at his side. The cut wasn't deep, but he realized the boy's real ability was harder to gauge than he had first thought. The mist that had been moved aside began to close in once again. "You want to play?" Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. Water clone technique, a dozen Zabuzas formed around the blonde figure. Hinata dodged another blow from her opponent, but so far Gozu had been unable to lay a hit on her. The young girl had an edge in speed, with her slight build, and her activated bloodline pushed the advantage further. The ninja in front of her was burdened with some heavy pieces of armor and weaponry, which slowed him down. She still lacked confidence and was reticent in landing blows. Her opponent was obviously losing his temper. Even though she was fine for now, the claw worried her. Her stamina wasn't great, and soon she would begin to slow down. That claw looked like it could do a lot of damage, and it was most likely only a matter of time before he swallowed his pride and began to use ninjutsu. Ino dodged her opponent's blow, which was already going wide, but she only did so to make it look like he was nearly hitting her. Kurenai had taught the platinum blonde jutsu, which she was putting to good use. Its weakness was that it was easily dispelled, and most genin would be able to shake the jutsu off. Its strength was that it was very subtle, shifting the target's depth perception just slightly so that they misjudged any target's position. Any intelligent fighter would have realized they were under a genjutsu pretty quickly, but her opponent apparently wasn't that bright. Still, it was only a matter of time before he realized and dispelled it. It only made it harder that if she struck Mizu a blow that caused significant pain, it would dispel the technique. For now she kept on the defensive while she thought, and she saw that Hinata seemed to be holding her own. Kurenai didn't find it difficult to match Haku's speed, but she was wary of what Zabuza had said before they had all separated. It seemed likely that the girl's strength was not her taijutsu skills. The Jounin caught a kick from the masked ninja, and then a punch, the force surprising. What was more surprising was that her opponent began to form one-handed seals. Sensatsu Sushu no Jutsu. Thousand flying water needles of death, the Jounin, who had seen this technique, jumped out of the way rapidly and, as she sailed through the air, formed seals of her own. Misegakure no Jutsu. Hiding camouflage technique, the red-eyed Jounin vanished from sight. Haku frowned, able to sense the woman near, but unable to pinpoint her location. She also knew the technique was too strong to dispel, leaving her with little choice. Makyo Hyosho. Demonic ice mirrors. Naruto noticed that Zabuza seemed pleased, and he wondered what the technique was that he'd heard the masked Kunoichi use. "Your sensei is out of luck." Zabuza blocked Naruto's attack, while Naruto pushed against the blade. The clones had quickly been destroyed some time ago. Don't underestimate Kurenai-sensei because of her Zabuza. The loveliest rose may have the sharpest thorns. Naruto smirked under his mask. You of all people should know that. Naruto was merely amused by his opponent's attempts at mind games. Zabuza grunted and jumped back, hidden once again in the mist. He began to suppress his chakra. Naruto realized he was going to have a hard time locating his enemy's position, the mist making it harder for his normal senses to be useful. He had been relying upon the Jounin's strong chakra signature until now. He had to think fast. Both Ino and Hinata were beginning to tire from their short time in combat. They stood with their backs facing each other and only a little distance between them. Unfortunately, Mizu chose this moment to realize that he was under a genjutsu because the two girls seemed to be occupying the same spot. Kai. Ino paled as she lost her advantage, and she saw the man give her a smirk as he raised his claw in a threatening manner. She could only watch as he moved towards her. Hinata was distracted by Ino's immediate peril and didn't completely dodge a blow to her head. Her opponent looked satisfied as he expected her to collapse from the impact. Hinata had no intention of meeting his expectations. Ino froze and didn't know what to do as the man was nearly upon her. She did something entirely foolish and closed her eyes, not quite brave enough to face her fate. A moment later she heard the sound of the breath rushing out of someone. She opened her eyes and saw another pair only an inch from her own. The eyes moved back unsteadily and Ino could see blood running down the man's chin. He fell aside with a stunned expression, revealing a rather fierce-looking Hyuga girl behind him with her palms still held out from a killing blow. Hinata saw Ino's amazement and she herself was amazed at her own actions. The Hyuga heiress had never mastered the Hyuga ability to land chakra-delivering blows. In her training she was never able to willing herself to send a small, but potentially deadly, amount of chakra into someone's body to damage their organs or close tenketsu. Even against one of the demon brothers she hadn't been able to muster the determination to use her clan's most deadly fighting style. Until now. She had seen her friend in mortal danger and had moved faster than she realized she could. Instinctively she had blasted chakra into Maizu's heart from behind. The blow had killed him instantly. Gozu watched his brother fall and for a moment was too stunned to act. The two brothers had always lived together and had known that one day they would die together. His blood burned with fury as he looked at the girl who had done it. The enraged Chunin dashed forward blindly. Ino saw that the man was looking right past her, his thoughts clouded by his anger. She didn't know what else to do but cast her one genjutsu. She succeeded as the man neared and managed to get inside his guard, where she used a kunai that she had pulled out. She drove the small weapon into the maddened man's chest and straight into his heart. The man's momentum carried him forward, where he fell on top of his brother. Dead. Ino and Hinata just stared at each other with pale faces. They had each made their first kills to save the other. There, and then the bond of friendship they had strengthened to become unbreakable. Ino broke the silence first. "We have to help Kurenai-sensei." Hinata turned and for the first time noticed a structure that appeared to be made out of ice. She gasped when she saw her sensei standing awkwardly and full of senbon needles. The two girls ran towards the hall of mirrors. Kurenai was still hidden by her genjutsu as she watched Haku launch herself again from the mirror she was in. The airborne Kunoichi threw senbon everywhere before she entered another mirror and came out again, launching more senbon. Haku moved too quickly even for a jounin to follow, but the airborne senbon could just be seen. While Haku didn't seem subject to air resistance, the needles were, and Kurenai could at least make an attempt to dodge. She continued to do so for some time, each time avoiding most of the needles and picking out as many as she could when Haku was in between jumps. Unfortunately she was slowing down due to her injuries and she wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight for long. Kurenai winced as more senbon hit her. She lost her concentration and the genjutsu fell. This girl seemed an even worse opponent for her than Zabuza. Her shinobi skills exceeded those of the Nuke Nins, but the girl's bloodline technique more than made up for it. The red-eyed Kunoichi had some explosive tags, but doubted they would make a dent in the thick unnatural ice. Naruto dodged yet another swipe of his opponent's blade, but he had not managed to dodge every one of them completely, and he was suffering some injuries. The lacerations were deep enough that they were taking some time to heal. He was annoyed. As long as the Nuke Nin was using only physical attacks, the Mist Nin could keep his chakra suppressed. The little Zabuza was using for the most was being masked by that same mist. The blonde heard laughter. "Those girls did well to defeat the demon brothers, weak as they were, but your sensei isn't afraid as well." His voice contained mock worry. Naruto had already sensed a fluctuation of his sensei's chakra output and put his plan into action when the Mist Nin last attacked. "I'd better end this now then, Zabuza." To his surprise, the arrogant Mist Nin appeared just in the blonde's vision. "I've been working on this one technique for some time, and I want you to be the first to see it." "I'm honored." Zabuza's tone implied otherwise as he dashed towards the blonde. "I won't let you use another sneaky technique." Naruto simply smiled as the other man was nearly upon him. Too late, the other man was about to swing his sword. Bunshin Daibakuha. Clone Great Explosion. From a distance, the real Naruto watched the mist evaporate due to the explosion. He was glad he'd left a clone on the sidelines of the fight to trade places with. He'd switched with the clone just after Zabuza's last attack, and his eyes had not been on the blonde. Ignoring his wounds, he rushed towards the ice structure, where he knew his teammates were. Kurenai turned as movement caught the corner of her eye and watched in dismay as Ino and Hinata entered the ice prison without hesitation. Ino and Hinata were surprised by their sensei's facial expression as they appeared to help her. Until Haku made another pass. Suddenly the bridge resounded with the noise of a large explosion. Haku felt anxious, but she couldn't see outside and just hoped reverently that Zabuza was okay. Shaking off her misgivings, since she was no good to Zabuza distracted, the young Kunoichi leapt out from the mirror once more. Naruto didn't even slow down as he entered the ice structure. He immediately saw that Hinata was on the ground. Ino was standing over the Hyuga, completely unaware of her surroundings, as she cried freely over her motionless teammate. Kurenai, despite her grief, had the presence of mind to prepare for the next attack. Haku paused when she saw Naruto enter, knowing what that most likely meant. For a moment that seemed to last forever, she did nothing. Naruto looked at Hinata's still form and felt no chakra at all coming from her. Out of the blue his head began to hurt as anger hit him like a sledgehammer. Take it. Naruto understood who was speaking to him and what was being offered. No. He shook with rage, aimed at the masked Kunoichi and the demon trying to take advantage of his grief. Avenge your friend. I can give you the power. Kurenai was the only one to see Naruto's eyes flicker red for a moment before they turned blue once more. He seemed to be talking to himself. She had a very bad feeling. Naruto's eyes began to flicker from blue to red and back as his body seemed to tense. Naruto felt a powerful chakra trying to force itself upon him, but he resisted. As much as he wanted revenge for the death of someone he had begun to feel close to, he still had two people who needed him. With a painful blast of his own chakra he purged himself clean of the foul chakra, and the voice spoke no more. With his own chakra still peaking he began to form seals. Kaiten, Jiao and Satsukaku no Jutsu. Fire release, killing wave of the black dragon technique. Naruto, who had raised his hands to his mouth, breathed out a large ash cloud of black smoke amidst a huge flame. The swirling vortex of cinders spread out and engulfed the fire, trapping the raging flames inside. Finally the black cloud began to form a more succinct shape, quickly becoming a dragon. The dragon radiated colossal heat from its black ash hide. The hide compressed the intense heat into a smaller area, making the damage it could cause more concentrated and giving it a larger physical impact. The eyes shone with red-hot fire as it shot towards the mirror Haku was still in. The nose of the dragon met the mirror and merely kept on going. There was a hiss as the ice melted and fell upon the dragon. The ice had been so cold that, as it melted, it actually cooled the dragon. Enough so that when Haku fell to the ground in a heap she was only singed rather than incinerated. The ice mirrors that had not been destroyed turned to water and fell to the ground. Naruto ignored Haku's prone form and moved over to Hinata. There was the very small chance that he could help her with a medical technique. He began to carefully pull out needles from her fair skin and, as he pulled the ones from her neck, there was a sharp intake of breath from the Hyuga girl. Naruto felt giddy with relief as Ino made an incoherent but loud noise. Kurenai was very glad that her student had survived, but she was still focused on where they were. Naruto. Once she had the blonde's attention she nodded to the direction where Haku had fallen. The two headed outside as Ino and the unsteady Hinata watched on. Naruto stood over the girl, whose mask had now broken and fallen off, and his anger fled. The unmasked girl had spared Hinata for her own reasons, and he looked down with sadness. The girl did not look badly burned, but the impact had broken several bones, and he guessed that she also suffered several punctured organs. Let me help you. He kneeled down beside the girl while her blank face looked at the sky. Zabuza-sama is dead, isn't he? The girl's voice wavered as she spoke. Naruto was forced to nod. I don't see how he could have survived. Then let me die. I have nothing to live for. The girl just lay there as if she was already dead. He didn't know what to say to comfort her, and he could only guess at the depth of the pair's relationship. I have a request from Naruto-san. Of course. Naruto felt it was the least he could do. Take me to him. I want to be with him at the end. She managed to keep her voice steady. Naruto ever so gently picked her up into his arms. He glanced at his sensei, who nodded, and walked towards where he had fought the demon of the mist. He hoped it wasn't too gruesome, but there was little he could do regarding that. Naruto was surprised that Zabuza was in fact still alive, though only just, with his sword beside him. It was obvious by looking at his blackened limbs, white face, and the strip of white down his chest that he had used the large blade to block some of the explosion's force. Haku saw that Zabuza was alive, and for a moment hope flared within her, but the part of her that knew a lot about human physiology extinguished it. The Mist Nin's breathing was haggard as he glanced up at the boy who had defeated him, and then at Haku. He said nothing as Naruto placed Haku beside him, but when the blonde stood up he spoke. "How is she?" Naruto was surprised by his concern, but shook his head sadly. "I could save her." He didn't need to say that the Nuke Nin's own injuries were too severe. He could tell that the Mist Nin's neck was not quite straight, which explained why he didn't turn his head. The fall had broken his neck, and it was likely, as soon as he was moved he would be killed. Zabuza continued to stare up at the sky. "Haku." Haku was able to turn her head. "Yes, Zabuza-sama?" "As soon as the clone exploded I thought I was dead, and when I landed I knew I was dead. I realized something that surprised me. I'm going to miss you, Haku." "Why miss a living weapon though? Perhaps you are more to me than I realized. I wish now that I hadn't led you down this path. I don't want you to be like me." Zabuza didn't look sad, but Haku knew he was. The knowledge of his own imminent death was changing him. "Don't die, Haku. I don't wish for you to die. I ruined your life. You saved me, Zabuza-sama." Haku ignored the pain in her chest as she shouted. Zabuza would have shaken his head if he could. "I saved you, but I still ruined your life. It would have been better if I'd have left you with someone who wasn't a cold-blooded killer. Look at yourself, Haku. Look what I turned you into. I want you to live and rid me of this one sin." Zabuza-sama, Haku found, for the first time since she could remember, tears running down her face. "I don't need a weapon. Where I'm going to die, Haku. I can accept that if I know you are still living on." Zabuza was finding it harder to breathe. "Naruto." Naruto didn't hesitate to stand next to Zabuza, where he could be seen. "Zabuza. You are one of the strongest opponents I have faced. You are also a good man. I'm glad that it was you who finished me, rather than some lowlife. I want you to take my sword," and his eyes showed intense emotion. "Would you heal Haku and take her with you?" Zabuza wasn't begging, but his voice sounded urgent as his breathing became more ragged. Naruto was surprised, but he still nodded. "Oh, of course." Haku looked up at Naruto. "You want me to go with him?" Surprisingly, she wasn't really angry at the masked blonde for killing Zabuza. It had been a fight to the death that the Mist Nin had insisted on, but she was surprised Zabuza would want her to go with him. "He's a man of honor, Haku, and there are few of those left these days. He's also strong. He defeated me at his age, and he'll only get stronger. He can protect you. He can show you the life I should have." Zabuza's voice was getting quieter. "Naruto." Naruto understood and began to heal Haku, his healing chakra blazing forth from his hands. He could sense Haku's vitals getting stronger. Zabuza started to gasp as Haku watched. "Haku, if I'd had a daughter I would have wanted her to be just like you." Zabuza let out one final gasp as he closed his eyes for the final time. There fell a reverent silence, only broken by the crash of waves far below them. Haku continued to look at Zabuza while she was healed. She felt empty, but in a way she felt content. Zabuza's well-being had always been her main concern, and he had never really been happy in his psychotic behavior, but at least at the very end he had found some peace. Naruto continued to work while his teammates and sensei were respectfully silent. Someone else, however, wasn't as respectful of the passing of the Nuke Nin. "So he was weak after all. I guess you saved us the effort of killing him." The group turned towards a crowd across the bridge. Haku was well enough to at least sit up, and she looked at Gato, who looked sickeningly smug. "Now all we have to do is take care of you." Naruto was feeling emotional at that moment, and it soon swung back towards anger. He thought he had hated this man as much as he could, but now he found himself hating him even more. Naruto concentrated the chakra on his right hand. No one saw him move. Suddenly he was past all the thugs and in front of the crime boss. He swung his hand at the man. Gatu's smile faded as blood began to seep from his neck before he dropped, his head rolling from his lifeless body. Naruto took one look at the thugs around him and their expressions. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a puff of smoke there were 50 Narutos. The men looked understandably uncertain. When an arrow landed in front of them, everyone looked up to see Inari with a Naruto clone. The boy was armed, and so were the dozens of people behind him. The young boy spoke up. "Get out of here." The men thought about their chances and fled. Naruto looked up at Inari, proud of the boy and his choice of actions. Naruto looked at his team and Haku, as if to assure himself they were all alright. His clones all dispersed, including the one by Inari. The blonde boy proceeded to close his eyes and collapse. As hundreds of jubilant citizens of the wave stood one side of the entrance to the village, 5 shinobi stood on the other. 3 of the citizens stood in front of them. A certain blonde boy was more than a little surprised when Tsunami leant forward and kissed his forehead. "Thank you so much for everything, Naruto-kun." She had already thanked the group as a whole, but had wanted to thank the blonde especially for the way he had changed her son. Naruto's hand went to the back of his head. "You're welcome, Tsunami." He got his hair ruffled for what she thought was a cute nervous habit. Inari stepped forward as he obviously tried to hold back tears. Naruto just smiled down at the boy. Now it was his turn to ruffle some hair. "It's okay to cry, Inari, when you're happy." Naruto put his hand on the boy's shoulder reassuringly. This was all the boy needed, and tears flooded down his face. "You will come and visit again soon, won't you?" The brown-haired hat-wearing boy looked to his new hero, an idol, hoping for confirmation. Naruto nodded. "I'll come back and see how you are all doing sometime." Tazuna came forward and patted Naruto firmly on the back. "You did well, kid. Our country owes you a lot." Naruto was once again embarrassed at being thanked so unabashedly. Ino, Hinata, and Kurenai looked amused at his discomfort. Haku's face looked blank, though there was still pain in her eyes. "Thanks, old man." Tazuna slapped Naruto on the back once again as he gave out a loud sharp laugh. "I hope your journey back is less eventful than the one here." He stepped back after he'd spoken. It was time for teammate +1 to leave. Naruto checked he had his seal scrolls on him. His backpack was empty of food, but he had even more in a seal scroll Kuri had made for him. His sword scroll held the large Kubikiri Haucho, head-cleaving sword, from Zabuza, while his usual sword was on his back, as usual. He could wield the large sword, but it was too large for him to carry about all the time. He would do something about that when he got back to Konoha. Teammate finally departed the wave 1 week after the battle on the bridge, which was now completed, and stood proudly stretching into the distance. After a couple of days, Kurenai noticed her companion's morale was down. So was her own. The Sommer group were traveling rather slowly, almost by unspoken agreement between them. Teammate had formed strong bonds over the period of their mission, and they knew that, when they returned, they would miss the camaraderie between them. Naruto seemed to be in the highest spirits, but he kept himself in check out of respect for everyone else's state of mind. Ino was not looking forward to returning home at all, to making what had happened to Naruto as a child reality, to find out that her father really was not who she had thought he was. Hinata didn't want to be split from her team, having been denied strong family bonds all her life. She felt her team was more her family than her own clan, which ran more like a business. Kurenai was a very maternal figure to her. Hinata looked up to her as a woman and as a kunoichi. Ino had become like a sister to the shy Hyuga, and she was closest with the platinum blonde girl of their group. After his battle with Zabuza, Hinata had developed a crush on Naruto for his heroic actions. The way he acted towards herself, and Ino made her wonder if that was what it was like to have a brother. Kurenai didn't have an aversion to returning to Konoha. She was sullen because she felt like she had failed her team as a sensei. Naruto had needed to save her 3 times on their mission, and she had felt useless and weak. Haku was simply in no rush to go to teammate's home village because her future was so uncertain. Despite her worries, she already knew that she could rely on Naruto. In the last week he'd tried to be there for her as much as he could, and, even though he had little comfort to offer her, his willingness had been important. Naruto was looking forward to seeing his friends and family, but he was enjoying his time with his team. Even if the atmosphere wasn't an overly happy one. On their 3rd day of traveling along the dirt road, Kurenai saw a sign that she decided was perhaps a small omen. She stopped the group, who were walking rather than running, as ninja might. "Let's take a break. There's a bathhouse down this way." She pointed to a small path, which led off the main road. "My treat." No one objected to the idea, and the small group changed the direction in which they were headed. Naruto thought it would be a good chance for the women to relax, though he himself would have to go in a separate area to the women. The group followed the small path for nearly a mile before they found a surprisingly large complex. There was a hotel, the bathing house itself, and several shops. It was like a miniature village. It surprised them that the spa drew enough business in the middle of nowhere. The group didn't know the place had a reputation for its natural hot springs. Appropriately, it was a popular place for people to get away from the world and their problems. The entrance was clearly marked by a sign. The wide single-story building had a large glass door through which the group entered. As soon as they crossed the threshold, they could feel the friendly atmosphere. The reception desk was to the left, and the woman behind it smiled widely. A mere 10 minutes later, Naruto sat in the warm water, with only a few other people spread out in the large pool. A fence separated the side of the mainspring from his companion's side. Naruto lay back on a carefully placed boulder and for amusement moved water about him with his wind chakra. He wasn't able to control it, but merely pushed at it haphazardly. The fox boy sunk down and closed his eyes, careful not to get his mask wet. He had to acknowledge it was relaxing. His mind was starting to get to a state which one might call sleep when a noise woke him up. It sounded like a little girl giggling. After a moment the sound came again, and Naruto sat up, looking about the pool. At first he thought it was coming from the women's half of the spring, but it didn't sound quite like the right direction. Unless the girl was standing by the fence on the far side of the pool. Naruto grabbed his towel and headed out of the warm water, but he nearly stopped as his skin hit the much cooler air. It was tempting to stay where he was, but when the giggle came again he stepped out of the pool and wrapped his towel around him. He headed around the large body of hot steaming water and to the fence. He heard the noise again. It was definitely coming from the other side of the fence, and he silently scaled the wooden perimeter. Naruto was surprised at what he saw over the fence, a middle-aged man dressed in an odd-looking outfit. The man was powerfully built, wearing a green ninja-style outfit with a large red jacket, and his long spiky white hair fell down his back. He wore a headband, but the blonde boy couldn't see it fully, as the front of it was currently pressed hard against the wooden fence. The thing that was most distinctive about the man was that, despite his apparent size and age, when he laughed he sounded like a little girl. "Excuse me." Naruto decided to keep calm, despite his annoyance at the pervert. "Go away. I'm busy." The man didn't even look at him, but took his eyes from a hole in the fence to scribble on a notepad. Naruto gave a small frown before suddenly giving a small smile under his mask. He just had an idea for a brand new technique. "Sorry to bother you." Naruto only received a grunt in response. Naruto disappeared from sight. He hadn't headed back to the pool, but the perverted man didn't seem to have noticed. Jiraiya, the legendary Sannin, looked through his peephole and was looking at one of the women who had just arrived. With wavy hair and red eyes, she was a rare beauty. The toad hermit began to drool, torn between watching the woman and scribbling notes on her perfect form. "Excuse me." A seductive and sultry voice came from behind the white-haired ninja. Even before he turned, he shivered, and he wasn't disappointed. Standing only in a towel was a drop-dead gorgeous blonde girl. She was almost absurdly proportioned, but in a way that pleased his lecherous eyes. Her eyes were deep blue, and she had cute lines on her cheeks. The veteran warrior seemed to lose his voice. The girl pouted and put her finger to her mouth in feigned innocence. "Why are you looking in there when you could be looking out here?" The girl moved closer. The perverted man moved closer to the girl with a leer on his face, but he didn't notice the girl in front of him whisper something to herself. Well, his smooth talk was interrupted when the girl proceeded to explode and knock him backwards, sending him through the fence and into the women's pool. Before a single second had passed, there were angry shouts and shrieks. Soon one loud and girlish voice screamed louder than the rest as one man got the beating of his life. Naruto sat up in the tree, having watched the whole thing. He wasn't being a pervert, as the women had immediately grabbed towels. It was handy that he could intentionally mess up his exploding clone technique so that the force wasn't as destructive. Casting a henge on the clone had come in an inspired moment. Warak Bunshin Daibakuha no Jutsu success. Sexy clone exploding technique. Before long, the carcass of a man lay at the bottom of the tree in which the blonde boy was currently sitting. The blonde climbed down and kicked the lump, which groaned pathetically in response. "You learned your lesson?" Naruto was surprised when the lump jumped up and turned into the perverted man, who looked like nothing had happened. He expected the man to be angry, but was surprised as the man's eyes lit up. "That was an amazing technique. To show it to me again?" The old man was leering at the thought, and it was freaking Naruto out more than a bit. If anyone else had happened to be watching, they would have thought the old man was drooling at a young boy. "No." Naruto gave the boy a meaningful look. "And stop looking at me like that unless you want people to think you like little boys." The old man's expression became serious. He got in enough trouble for being a pervert, and he decided to merely pretend it hadn't happened. Don't you know who you're talking to, Gaki? The old man gestured dramatically. Naruto had the feeling he was just about to find out whether he liked it or not. No, and I don't really want to KN. The man started doing a weird dance. Naruto had never meditated with his eyes open before, but he found himself hiding inside his own mind until a voice called out. Jiraiya, the legendary Toad Sannin. It was too loud for Naruto to ignore, and he recognized the name. Naruto just stared at the man, who was still in his final pose. It looked uncomfortable. You're Jiraiya, the legendary ninja who trained thousands sensei the Yondaime? His voice showed his uncertainty in believing the man. Jiraiya stood up straight, his face showing surprise. Arashi trained your father? Who's your father, Gaki? He knew the answer already. Haddock Kakashi. I'm Haddock Naruto. Nice to meet you, sort of. Naruto deadpanned. Jiraiya nodded to himself, as if confirming something. He was my student's student. His eyes became wide and moist. But more than that, he used to be my biggest fan. He used to write me so much fan mail. He read my books with all the passion I wrote them with. He looked annoyed. Then he wrote a letter one day apologizing that he would never be able to read one of my books again, or he'd be killed. He was such a big fan that I actually believed him. Odd though. Naruto gave the author of the infamous orange books a filthy look. He was right, it did. Jiraiya's expression was curious once more. You had something to do with it? Naruto crossed his arms, forgetting he was still in his towel, and looked a bit foolish. When he started dating Akiko-chan, my mother, I told him he wasn't allowed to read them anymore after I incinerated his collection. Jiraiya didn't appear particularly annoyed. As many people hated his books as loved them. He was thinking about what the boy had said, though he was not sure why he cared. He just had this feeling when he looked at the boy, as if he reminded him of someone. So you weren't born a Haddock? I thought Kakashi was too young to be a father. Naruto had no idea why the man thought it was his business. If you must know, I was adopted. I was born Uzumaki Naruto. Jiraiya's face became blank. He knew the name of the container of the 9 tails and the son of his most prized student. Kakashi didn't know he'd adopted his sensei's son. Naruto could guess some of the thoughts the man was having. You know what I am then? Naruto subtly took a defensive stance. Jiraiya looked confused for a moment before he chuckled. You think you want to win a battle against me? Not that he had any intention of attacking, however. Naruto shrugged. I'd lose, but I wouldn't make it easy for you. He remained in his stance. Jiraiya laughed loudly. You've got guts, Gaki. Naruto began to relax. He was fairly good at treating people, and his heightened senses detected no ill intentions from the man. So they tell me, Iro Sennin. The older man's face turned red. What did you call me? Naruto held his gaze. You are a pervert and a self-proclaimed hermit. Jiraiya looked triumphant. I'm not a pervert, I'm a super pervert. He went so far as to punch the air. Naruto's sweat dropped. You might want to keep it down, the women will hear you. My sensei, he gestured at the man in front of him who quickly got the point. Jiraiya got a perverted grin. Which one is your sensei then? Naruto could not believe the man's gall. I'm not going to tell you. He really wanted to get away from this guy. Jiraiya looked like he thought he was being cunning. You know the Daibakuha no Jutsu, which is a Jounin level technique. I could show you some equally powerful techniques. Sannin was interested in what this boy could do, not to mention that he felt he should help out the son of his favorite student. The question about the boy's sensei was a ruse mostly. Naruto hesitated for a moment, but he wouldn't exactly be giving a secret away. She's quite tall, with wavy raven-colored hair, red eyes, and fair skin. Jiraiya began to drool as he thought about the woman who'd caught his attention the most. At least until an angry cough brought him back to reality. Mean kick that one. I take it you're on your way back from a mission? It wasn't as if ninjas made a habit of stopping at bathhouses on their way out on missions. Naruto again hesitated. Yes. Jiraiya smiled with questionable motives. I'm on my way to Konoha too. He didn't say that it was normally a 2-month journey because he stopped at every bathhouse along the way for research. Naruto had a feeling where the man was going. And if I tell your sensei that I'll show you some techniques, she'll have to let me travel with you. Jiraiya was practically rubbing his hands. Naruto snorted. Kurenai sensei doesn't like pervert Zero Sennin. The Sannin ignored the jibe. You let me worry about that, Gaki. Go get changed, and we'll wait for your sensei. I feel generous enough to show you a powerful jutsu while we wait, as a show of faith. Naruto wasn't going to complain if the man was going to train him just so he could travel with Kurenai. His sensei could look after herself, and Jiraiya didn't stand a chance with her anyway. He walked back to the main building to get dressed as quickly as he could manage. He may not have liked perverts, but he knew Jiraiya's reputation wasn't for nothing. A short time later, Naruto was standing in front of the perverted Sannin, but this time a little distance from the springs. "So what were you going to show me, Iro Sannin? Do you know what a summon is?" The white-haired shinobi ignored the boy's insult. Naruto nodded. "I have a contract for dogs from my father." Jiraiya gave a satisfied smile. That makes this a lot easier, but dogs don't come that big, and they don't have a boss. What would you say if I told you I would let you sign the Toad contract?" Naruto couldn't believe he was being offered such a contract on a whim. "Will I be able to use both toads and dogs?" He hadn't summoned dogs often, since they were largely for tracking, but the ability to summon them had been a gift from his father. Jiraiya nodded. "Yes. Not many people are lucky enough to sign 2 contracts, but there is no rule against it. When you have more than one contract, you simply ask for the summon creature you desire. You can do the same with 1 contract, but it's not needed." The Sannin began forming seals and bit his thumb before he slammed his hand onto the ground. Gamakuchi's no jutsu. Toad summoning technique. Naruto watched as an orange toad, which was taller than himself, appeared in front of the white-haired Sannin. As he watched, it opened its mouth and unrolled its large tongue, revealing a scroll for the Sannin to take. The hermit took this scroll and opened it, waving the blonde boy over. "Sign your name in blood below the last signature." The Sannin put the scroll on the toad's back as he opened it. Naruto noticed the last name was that of the 4th Hokage. He didn't bite his thumb, as he had a sharp stud on his belt for that purpose. He had to write his name quickly before his thumb healed. Once it was done, the blood dried instantly, and the Sannin took the scroll back, rolled it up, and gave it to the toad. The creature disappeared in another puff of smoke. The Sannin was not much for the ceremony apparently. A few moments passed. "Give it a try then." The Sannin became annoyed when the blonde hadn't done anything for a while. Naruto formed the seals, which he knew from having summoned in the past, and pierced his thumb. He concentrated his chakra, using the same amount as when he had summoned Pakken a few times before. Gamakuchi's no jutsu. Toad summoning technique. A small toad appeared and looked up at the boy curiously. In a move that reminded him of his father, the toad lifted a webbed foot up. "Yo. I'm Gamakichi. Nice to meet you. You got a sweet?" Naruto shook his head. "I'm Naruto, and sorry I didn't realize you'd want one." Gamakichi gave a toad shrug. "No problem, but if you want to summon me in future, have a sweet handy." Jiraiya was impressed by the ease of the summoning, though he supposed it was because the fox boy could already summon. More impressively still, it didn't seem to take anything out of the blonde at all. "Try it again, but with more chakra." "How much more?" Naruto was already thinking of the man like a sensei, even if a perverted one. Jiraiya wanted him to try and get a horse-sized toad. "As much as you can." He intended to get the boy to try and use the Kyuubi's chakra to summon Gamabunta at a later date. Naruto decided not to question the wisdom of this as he formed seals and pierced his already healed thumb. He prepared a large amount of chakra, enough so that he definitely feel the effect afterwards. Gamakuchi's no jutsu. Toad summoning technique. Naruto released the chakra. Jiraiya's eyes widened at the amount of chakra released. He knew what this meant. Okami. Naruto was surrounded by smoke, and when it cleared he looked down a long way. "Jiraiya. What have you summoned me for?" The voice that came out was loud, deep, and didn't sound overly helpful. Naruto looked at the toad that was as high as the Hokage Tower. There was a massive pipe sticking out its mouth and a large katana strapped to its back. He had heard of a toad such as this, a legend throughout the shinobi world. The new toad summoner jumped onto its nose and gave a small bow. "I'm afraid I summoned you by accident, Gamabunta. I mistakenly used too much chakra." Naruto had used about a fifth of his total chakra, and that was only because his reserves had increased after his last battle. Not too long ago it would have been about 1/4. Gamabunta crossed his large eyes to focus on the boy, who was dressed like he was a serious ninja. "Okay Gaki, I believe you. My son was just telling me about you. Naruto, right? I like your respectful attitude." The massive mouth curved into a smile, though the blonde didn't see it. "I'll allow you to summon me on 2 conditions." Naruto didn't hesitate in answering. "Name it." When you're old enough you'll have your first drink with me, and don't show the same respect to Jiraiya." The toad chuckled as Jiraiya began to flap about far below. "And if Jiraiya gets up to his perverted ways, just summon me again. I like excuses to beat him." "No problem Gamabunta-sama, and thank you." Naruto thought he might be overdoing the respect factor, but better safe than sorry. Gamabunta was still laughing when he disappeared again in a puff of smoke. Naruto landed on the ground in a slight squat, having fallen quite some distance. Jiraiya frowned at the blonde boy, but anything he was going to say was interrupted when Fork and Oichi appeared. Fork and Oichi are still in their towels. Though Naruto was a little distance from the baths, the toad boss would have easily been visible above the tree line. Jiraiya's face became lecherous as he looked at the group of Kunoichi. Kurenai looked like a pervert to Naruto. Her face showed confusion and irritation at the man she had helped beat earlier. "What's going on here?" Naruto didn't answer, already beginning to form seals before piercing his thumb. Gamakuchius no Jutsu. Toad summoning technique, the toad boss appeared again, with Naruto on top. The girl's jaws dropped at the sight of an annoyed-looking Gamabunta. Naruto spoke to where he thought the toad boss's left ear was. The softly spoken words were not loud enough for everyone else to hear. Jiraiya had a bad feeling as the toad boss turned to him. "Jiraiya, you pervert. What have I told you about your ways?" The toad began to open its mouth, and the woman instinctively backed away from the white-haired man. Jiraiya wasn't going to be given the chance to defend himself. Naruto chuckled as a large tongue shot from the toad's mouth towards the very pale-looking Toad Sannin. Soon girlish screaming could be heard around for miles. Kurenai gave the man she was bandaging a dirty look. "I can't believe a man of your reputation is a pervert, Jiraiya-sama." Jiraiya wasn't ashamed at all. Super pervert. The clip he received around the ear was all the more painful from his recent fight with a giant toad, though it had been less a fight than a severe one-sided beating. He couldn't believe the blonde and the toad boss had taken such a short time to become pals and gang up on him. Ungrateful Gaki. Let him sign the toad scroll, and this is the thanks I get. Jiraiya continued to mutter to himself. The Kunoichi were now dressed as they sat around a campfire. Ino and Kurenai frequently gave the pervert the look, while Haku just avoided him, and Hinata looked worried. Naruto just lay back in the evening light. "It's bad enough you're a pervert, but you will show my team and Haku more respect." His voice was calm, but his point was clear. Jiraiya sighed. He was just trying to be true to himself, but perverts couldn't catch a break. "Alright Gaki. I'm too tired to argue." Kurenai stoked the fire with a stick and turned to the injured white-haired hermit. "What are you doing out here anyway, Jiraiya-san?" She decided to drop the honorific. They were only just back in the fire country and were several days traveling from Konoha at their current pace anyway. Jiraiya didn't know if it was safe to answer. Just traveling around and doing a little research. He had no intention of explaining further. Lucky for him, no one wanted to ask. "I'm heading back to the Leaf via several other places. It was going to take me a couple of months, but the Gaki here has caught my attention." Kurenai glanced at Naruto. "Really? It wasn't a question. If you'll allow it, I'll travel with your group. It's been a while since I taught, and they say a change is as good as a rest." Jiraiya winced due to his bruised ribs. He felt like he needed a rest more than a change, but he really was interested in teaching the blonde kid. Not to mention the boy's heritage. Kurenai sat down beside Ino and Hinata. "If that's what you want, I certainly can't stop you." It wasn't the warm welcome he'd hoped for, but it would do for the Toad Sannin. Jiraiya fell dozed off a few times in the evening, still recovering from his ordeal. In the brief periods he awoke, he noticed a silence in the group, but said nothing. Several days passed, and now the group was walking down the road. There was silence once more, but it was a little more comfortable now. The group was getting used to it. Naruto glanced at Jiraiya, who seemed to have healed. "When were you planning on teaching me something else?" So far the Sannin had just taken up space in his tent and eaten their food. Jiraiya snorted. "I let you sign a prestigious contract, you ungrateful Gaki, but fine." Jiraiya held his hand out. "You have enough chakra control for the Bunshin Daibakuha and enough chakra to summon Gamabunta twice and keep over half your chakra." He wouldn't openly admit how impressed he was by these facts. He held his right hand out, palm up. "I think this technique might suit you." He didn't mention that by rights he should inherit the technique anyway. Naruto watched as a blue glow began to emit from the Sannin's hand. Threads of chakra began to spin rapidly in the hermit's palm, and soon a bright glowing blue sphere appeared. The Kunoichi head turned and watched it in curiosity. Kurenai had heard of it, but Ino and Hinata had no way of knowing what it was. Jiraiya smirked as everyone watched. It was his chance to impress the ladies with his skill. The Sannin walked over to a tree. Rasengan. The large man slammed his palm into the tree, and the sphere ground into it. The powerful attack shredded a massive hole into the tree, tearing away most of the trunk. Jiraiya turned to the group, putting on a macho air. "So what do you think, ladies? Impressive, isn't it?" He was annoyed that no one was looking at him, instead looking behind him. When the Sannin heard a creaking noise, it was already too late. Naruto watched the medium-sized tree fall over and hit Jiraiya on the head, knocking him out. He gave a weary sigh and pulled the large man onto his back. The hermit was much bigger than Naruto, and his sandals dragged along the ground. Half an hour later, the Sannin, who was becoming less of a legend by the hour, woke up. He jumped off the blonde like nothing had happened. "So you want to try?" The women just ignored him this time. Naruto nodded and formed a seal. Tadyu Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Several hundred puffs of smoke appeared. The group stopped as everyone wondered what was going on. "Show me one more time, Iro Sennin. Would you please kill me?" Jiraiya, however, raised his hand. He didn't know that all the Narutos were enhancing their vision and watching very, very closely. Several hundred pairs of eyes took it all in from every conceivable angle. "Thanks." Naruto began to walk off, and soon Jiraiya followed. "You're not going to practice?" The hermit was surprised. The blonde had seemed so keen. Naruto shook his head. "I'm not, but they are. We need to keep moving. Or they would never get home." Jiraiya turned and saw the clones were still there. "You're smarter than you look." Naruto didn't know whether this was a compliment or not. He left the clones to work as the group headed on. When they stopped for the night, Naruto released his clones. He was sitting down and dismissed a few dozen at a time. Even though he was mentally tired from his efforts, he wasn't exhausted. He frowned as the clones had made surprisingly little progress. His expression didn't go unnoticed. "Not much luck if I take it?" Jiraiya seemed innocently curious. Naruto hated to admit it. "Not really." Jiraiya chuckled. "Don't worry, Gaki. There are steps to learning it." He fetched his backpack and took out a small scroll. Unrolling it, he bit his thumb, and after he wiped his thumb over a small seal, several travel bags came forth. Naruto was impressed that the seal was capable of storing a multitude of items at once. That took a seal master's skill. The Sannin searched within one of the bags for a few minutes, and eventually his arm reappeared holding some unexpected items. Naruto looked at the balloons and rubber balls, but the items didn't mean much to him. "Don't tell me I'm going to use them to train." Jiraiya grinned mischievously. "Yep, we'll need to fill these balloons with water. I'll show you the steps so you can try again, but we'll do that tomorrow." Naruto really wished the man had told him earlier, but had to admit that it was his own fault for being too sure of himself. There was a lesson for him here. "Tomorrow it is then called Iro Sennin." The blonde found his thoughts shift. "Iro Sennin, I take it, you're a seal master. I was wondering if you could help me with something." Jiraiya looked into the night sky as he listened to the rustle of the wind in the trees, a soothing sound. Everyone else was in bed, but he never slept much. 4 hours of sleep seemed to suffice most nights, even as he got older. It was times like this when the past came back to him. Sometimes haunting recollections, but sometimes pleasant memories filled his thoughts. He remembered when his team were young, and Tsunade was temperamental, yes, violent, certainly, but carefree. Orochimaru had merely been a little creepy. Jiraiya himself had been the same idiot he'd always been. He really missed those days. He'd seen both his teammates destroyed in different ways. As he wandered around the Fire Country and beyond, he sometimes felt like the Sannin were more ghosts than ninjas. Legends in the real sense, that they were no longer of this world. Then there was his student Arashi. It said a lot about his deep thoughts that he didn't sense someone approaching. "Jiraiya-san?" Kurenai had only come to get a drink of soothing tea since she was having trouble sleeping. She hadn't realized the white-haired hermit was still up. Jiraiya turned his head towards the red-eyed Jounin, and for a moment she glimpsed a depth to his soul that had previously been hidden by his perverted nature. He seemed more like a Sannin with that look, with wisdom in his eyes and even in the deepened lines around his mouth. "Trouble sleeping, Kurenai-san?" His voice was surprisingly relaxed, coming out deep and rich. She was reminded of her father from when she was a child. The effect was spooky and comforting at the same time. Kurenai moved towards the still glowing fire, intent on stoking the flames. "It's nothing." She picked up the kettle, not facing the man who had just spoken. Jiraiya smiled to himself, since the kunoichi wasn't facing him. "I may be an infamous pervert, Kurenai-san, but I'm no fool. Why don't you tell old man Jiraiya what's wrong?" Despite his playful tone, he seemed genuine. "With my lifestyle, I'm hardly in a position to judge." That was the closest he'd got to being embarrassed about his research. Kurenai really felt the need to talk to someone about her troubles. She had intended to speak to the Hokage, but he wasn't here now, and Jiraiya was. Putting the steel kettle on the fire, she moved away and sat next to the Sannin. Much to her surprise, the infamous shinobi made no attempt to leer or do anything else inappropriate. She began to tell the white-haired man what had happened on their mission. It came out in a flood until she eventually began to slow down at the last part. "When I fought Haku, I was able to keep up with her until she used her bloodline and trapped me in a prison of ice mirrors. I was already hidden by a genjutsu, but I couldn't get out. The chakra that held the structure let people in, but not out. Haku was able to exist in the ice mirrors and move between them with amazing speed, using senbon needles to attack. I tried to cast genjutsu, but she wasn't out of the mirrors long enough, and they wouldn't penetrate the chakra lot on ice. Only my passive genjutsu worked at all. As soon as I was in there, I was lost. Ino and Hinata came in after their own fight, but Haku outmatched us all. We thought at one point Hinata had been killed." She sighed deeply. "Then Naruto defeated Zabuza with his exploding clone and came in after us. When he saw Hinata, Kyuubi tried something. I don't know what it was, but Naruto's eyes were flickering between red and blue for several seconds. He released a huge wave of chakra that stopped it. Then he used a fire technique I have never seen, a fire dragon covered in dense black soot, and it shattered the prison apart like it was a toy. Haku was defeated. Zabuza was dying when we found him, and his last wish was for her to go with Naruto." The Jounin fell silent. She had been almost babbling some of the time. Jiraiya watched the female Jounin and for now put aside any thoughts he had about Kyuubi. He could see why the Jounin kunoichi was having a hard time admitting what was bothering her. It would have been even harder to talk to anyone junior to her. "You've lost confidence in yourself." Though it wasn't a question, Kurenai nodded anyway. The white-haired man took a deep breath. "You have two options," Kurenai-san. The man was intending to pull no punches. "Learn from your mistakes or don't." Kurenai gave Jiraiya a surprised look. "Excuse me? I don't know if you wanted me to comfort you or offer you reassurance, but I'm not going to do either. It wouldn't help. You found a weakness in yourself that could have proved fatal to not just yourself, but your students as well." Jiraiya noticed that Kurenai seemed to take that hard. "No one is perfect, Kurenai-san. People have their weaknesses. The important question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Kurenai's face remained blank. "You know you're never too old to learn, and you're decades my junior. If Naruto impresses you so much in your battles, why don't you ask him to teach you some of his techniques?" Kurenai didn't look happy at that idea. "I'm his sensei. It's not appropriate for him to be teaching me." She felt a little insulted by the suggestion. Jiraiya shook his head. "You mean you're too embarrassed, but you shouldn't be. There is no shame in it. When I was a genin, I taught the old man a few of the techniques I learned and created. He got the name the professor because he didn't let his pride get in the way of his continuing education. The Yondaime taught me several techniques, the Rasengan being only one of them. I know that Kakashi taught Arashi a few things he picked up with his Sharingan. I guess that Naruto has shared techniques with Kakashi as well. You see, the difference between a good ninja and a great ninja is knowing that you're never as good as you have the potential to be, so keep learning and keep striving. I think Naruto understands that, and maybe it's time you do too." Kurenai gave a small frown. "I understand, but in those circumstances the sensei taught their students more than their students taught them. I haven't taught Naruto anything." Jiraiya gave a knowing smile. "But you can teach him something. From what you tell me of the battles on your mission, and from what little I have seen of Naruto's character, I bet he has next to no skill in genjutsu. Furthermore, if I had to bet on who would win a fight between you both, my money would be on you. Naruto would have no defense against your genjutsu techniques." Kurenai realized that Jiraiya was most likely correct, and if that was the case, then she and Naruto could teach each other. That wouldn't be such a blow to her Jounin pride. "I'll talk to Naruto when we get back." She still felt a little worried, but she thanked the older shinobi and went back to bed feeling better than she had. Jiraiya got up to help himself to the forgotten kettle of hot water and made himself a cup of tea. He was looking forward to training tomorrow with his new blonde student. He hated being so serious sometimes. It made him feel old. As soon as the group of shinobi arrived back at their home village, Jiraiya began to walk in the direction of the bathhouse. He noticed the group's looks. "What? You're lucky I managed to go this long." With no shame at all, Jiraiya headed off with a perverted glint in his eye. Naruto couldn't make up his mind about Sannin. Part of him admired him, and part of him wanted to smack his head a lot. The blonde took out his paperwork, as his teammates did the same, and they headed toward the Chunin guards. They were home at last. Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. If you want the next part of this story, let me know in the comment box. See you next time, till then sayonara.